Imagine surviving a train crash into a freezing river, then falling out of an airplane without a parachute, then escaping a bus that plunged into another river. Then surviving two burning cars, being hit by a bus, and watching your car disappear over the edge of a mountain. Most people would assume the universe was trying to kill them. But then, after surviving all of that, you buy a lottery ticket and win the jackpot. This is the unbelievable story of Frane Selak, the Croatian music teacher known around the world as the luckiest man who ever lived. At least, that is what he wanted us to believe. Because when people began looking more closely at his story, they noticed something strange. Some of the accidents had no records. Important details kept changing. And one of the most dramatic disasters may never have happened at all. So was Frane Selak really protected by fate? Was he the unluckiest man in history? Or was he simply one of the greatest storytellers the world has ever known? To understand how this legend began, we need to go back to the early 1960s. Frane Selak was not a soldier, a stuntman, or a professional daredevil. He was a music teacher. He taught students, played the piano, and lived what appeared to be a completely ordinary life in what was then Yugoslavia. There was nothing about him that suggested he was about to become the main character in a real-life action movie, but according to Frane, everything changed in January 1962. He was traveling by train through the cold mountains of Yugoslavia. Outside, heavy rain had fallen over the region. The rivers were freezing, the rocks were wet, and the railway passed through narrow valleys where one mistake could become a disaster. Frane claimed that a rockslide struck the railway and caused the train to derail. One of the carriages left the tracks, smashed through the barrier, and plunged into the icy Neretva River below. Inside the carriage, passengers were thrown against the walls, windows shattered, freezing water rushed in, the carriage began sinking. Frane said he was trapped underwater with almost no chance of escaping, but somehow he managed to break through a window and pull himself out of the wreckage. He fought against the current and reached the riverbank. He survived with hypothermia and a broken arm. According to the most widely repeated version of the story, 17 other passengers were not so fortunate. Most people would consider surviving something like that the defining event of their entire life. Frane apparently considered it the beginning. Because just 1 year later, he claimed that death came looking for him again, and this time, it found him thousands of feet above the ground. In 1963, Frane supposedly boarded an airplane. Some versions of the story say it was his first flight, and judging by what allegedly happened next, it probably should have been his last. During the journey, something went terribly wrong. A door on the aircraft suddenly opened in midair, the cabin filled with violent wind. Passengers were pulled from their seats, and Frane claimed that he was thrown completely out of the airplane. No parachute, no safety equipment, nothing between him and the ground below. He fell through the sky while the aircraft continued toward the mountains. At this point, there should have been no possible way for him to survive, but according to Frane, he landed in a haystack. A haystack. Of all the places he could have landed, rocks, trees, roads, or the side of a mountain, he supposedly landed on one of the few things soft enough to save him. The aircraft crashed, and the popular version of the story claims that 19 people died. Frane walked away. You might survive one impossible disaster, maybe even two. But after falling out of an airplane and landing in hay, most people would stop traveling completely. Frane did not. 3 years later, in 1966, he got on a bus. And because Frane Selak apparently had the worst possible relationship with public transportation, the bus also ended up in a river. According to his story, the driver lost control while traveling along a wet road. The bus broke through a barrier and plunged into the water. 4 passengers reportedly drowned. Frane once again escaped the vehicle and swam to safety with only minor injuries. At this point, the question was no longer whether Frane was lucky. The question was why he kept getting onto vehicles. A train had thrown him into a river, an airplane had thrown him into the sky, and now a bus had thrown him into another river. The safest way for this man to travel would have been to stay home and send a letter, but Frane continued living normally, and eventually he decided that perhaps he would be safer driving himself. He was wrong. In the early 1970s, Frane was traveling in his car when he noticed a problem. There was a smell of gasoline, then the engine caught fire. Flames began spreading through the vehicle. Frane stopped the car, jumped out, and moved away moments before the fuel tank reportedly exploded. He survived again. His car did not. You would think that after surviving a burning vehicle, Frane would have become extremely careful around anything that smelled even slightly unusual. But a few years later, he found himself inside another car, and once again, something smelled like gasoline. According to one version of the story, Frane's wife warned him about the smell. Frane apparently dismissed her concern. After all, cars were supposed to smell like cars. They were not supposed to smell like chocolate. Moments later, fuel from a malfunctioning pump reportedly sprayed onto the hot engine. Flames shot through the air vents and into the car. Frane escaped, but not before the fire burned much of his hair. The man had now survived a train, an airplane, a bus, and 2 burning cars. Death had tried land, air, water, and fire. Frane was still standing, and then strangely, everything became quiet. For more than 20 years, no trains fell into rivers, no airplane doors opened, no vehicles exploded. Frane grew older. Perhaps the universe had finally given up. Perhaps death had checked its schedule, seen Frane's name, and decided it was not worth the trouble. But in 1995, the accidents returned. Frane was walking through Zagreb when he was struck by a bus. A bus, again. After decades of surviving some of the most ridiculous accidents imaginable, he was nearly defeated while crossing the street. But Frane survived with minor injuries. 1 year later came what was supposedly his final, and perhaps most cinematic escape. In 1996, Frane was driving along a narrow mountain road. On one side of the road was the mountain. On the other was a steep drop. As he approached a bend, a large truck appeared in front of him. There was not enough room to pass safely. Frane swerved. His car smashed through the guardrail and began falling over the edge, but Frane was not wearing a seat belt. Usually, that would make a crash even more dangerous. This time it may have saved his life. According to his account, the door opened and he was thrown from the vehicle. He managed to grab onto a tree or branch near the side of the cliff. He hung there while his car tumbled hundreds of feet into the valley below. Imagine that scene. An elderly music teacher hanging from a tree on the side of a mountain, watching his car disappear beneath him and probably thinking, "Not this again." Police and emergency workers eventually rescued him. Frane had survived what became known as his 7th escape from death: a train derailment, an airplane disaster, a bus crash, 2 burning cars. Being struck by another bus, and a car falling from a cliff. If the story ended there, Frane Selak would already have one of the most unbelievable lives ever recorded. But fate apparently had one final surprise waiting for him, and this time it was not trying to kill him. In 2002 or 2003, the exact year changes depending on the account, Frane bought a lottery ticket around the time of his birthday. He was in his 70s. Some reports say he had been playing for decades. Others say it was the first ticket he had bought in 40 years. Either way, Frane's numbers came up. He won several million Croatian kuna, worth approximately 800,000 euros at the time. After spending his entire life supposedly escaping death, Frane had now beaten odds that millions of people spend their entire lives trying to beat. The world had found its luckiest man. Frane reportedly used the money to purchase property, a boat, and a new car. Buying another car was either incredibly brave or proof that he had learned absolutely nothing. He also helped friends and relatives and eventually gave away much of the fortune. He returned to a simpler life with his wife, claiming that money was not the most important thing in the world. It is a perfect ending. The ordinary music teacher survives 7 disasters, wins the lottery, and finally lives happily ever after. There is just one problem. When researchers and journalists attempted to confirm Frane's story, parts of it began falling apart. The train accident was difficult to verify. The bus accident was difficult to verify. The number of deaths changed between different retellings. The dates of the car fires changed. Even Frane's descriptions of what happened were not always consistent. But the biggest problem was the airplane. An accident involving a commercial aircraft, 19 deaths, and a passenger falling from the sky should have produced reports, official records, and newspaper coverage. Yet investigators could not find a plane crash from 1963 matching Frane's description. No confirmed aircraft, no confirmed passenger list, no clear record of 19 victims. Nothing matching the famous story of a man landing safely in a haystack. Frane also became internationally famous only after winning the lottery. By then, many of the accidents had supposedly happened decades earlier. that does not automatically mean he invented everything. It is possible that Frane survived real accidents and exaggerated certain details. It is possible that journalists misunderstood parts of his story. It is possible that several different events became mixed together after decades of retelling. Every time the story was repeated, perhaps the river became deeper, the cliff became higher. The explosion became larger, and the escape became more impossible. That is how legends are created. A real event happens, someone retells it, another person improves it. And eventually, the story becomes more memorable than the truth. There was even an unconfirmed online claim from someone identifying himself as Frane's son, accusing him of inventing the accidents after winning the lottery. But the identity of that person was never proven either, so even the claim that Frane lied cannot be completely verified, and maybe that is what makes this story so fascinating. We do not know exactly what happened. Frane may have been the luckiest man in the world. He may have been incredibly unlucky and fortunate enough to survive. Or he may have discovered that an unbelievable story can travel much further than the truth. But there is another question. Can someone really be considered lucky after experiencing that many disasters? Imagine spending your entire life inside burning cars, sinking buses, and falling aircraft. Surviving is lucky. Being there in the first place is not. Frane himself reportedly rejected the title of the world's luckiest man. From his perspective, a truly lucky person would never have been involved in those accidents at all, and perhaps he had a point. Maybe luck is not surviving a train crash. Maybe luck is taking a different train. Maybe luck is not escaping a burning car. Maybe it is having a car that never catches fire. Maybe the luckiest people are the ones whose lives are so peaceful that nobody ever makes a YouTube video about them. Frane Selak died in 2016, leaving behind a story that still sits somewhere between history and legend. A man who supposedly cheated death 7 times, then defeated the lottery. Whether every detail was true may never be known, but Frane certainly achieved one thing. He convinced millions of people to remember his name. So what do you believe? Was Frane Selak genuinely the luckiest man who ever lived? Was he the unluckiest? Or was his greatest piece of luck convincing the world that all of this actually happened? Tell me your answer in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, subscribe, because the next unbelievable story might be even stranger than this one.